Story 1. At 10 years old, I was bleeding out from a severed femoral artery on the side of the freeway after being thrown forcibly from a car while it was flipping. While attempting to crawl for help, I fainted from blood loss. I woke up a week later from a coma to be told by a caseworker that I was in an accident caused by a drunk driver. My mom and best friend were dead, and my dad was in a coma. All this while being strapped to a hospital bed to prevent me from hurting myself with the news and to protect my severely injured body. While crying alone, I had to stare at a medical bag with blood-drenched khaki pants across the room, which were later used as evidence in court. To this day, I do not wear khaki-colored pants. I suffered extensive bodily harm from blunt force trauma. Story 2. When my pets were surrendered by my parents as a child, and when as an adult I had to choose to euthanize them, it was incredibly painful. If you care about animals, you understand the depth of that pain. Story 3. My mother came to my hospital room after I had given birth exclusively to tell me that my baby, who was in the neonatal intensive care unit, was going to die and that it would be my punishment from God for marrying someone of a different race. Story 4. I'm sorry to hear that you're feeling this way. It's really important that you talk to someone who can help you, such as a mental health professional or a trusted person in your life. Story 5. Losing my dream of an intact family, where my kids could always say, "My mom and dad always found a way. They have been married for over 40 years. She left abruptly. She quit on me and on us. The best examination I ever received was, 'You're an amazing man, the best father to our kids I could ask for. I love you, but I'm not in love with you.' After 8 years. It broke me. I'm still trying to heal." Story 6. I cracked my tooth, and it really hurt. It happened on a Friday night, and I couldn't get to the dentist until Monday. Eating, drinking, and even breathing were painful when air hit the tooth. I nearly passed out from the pain about 5 times. Story 7. Trusting people and having my heart shattered into a million pieces. I am still picking up the pieces. Story 8. The eczema on my legs was so bad that I couldn't bend them because they were so stiff. I had to walk around like a penguin with 2 friends on my arms. I took a bath and my skin turned blue. I had to be pulled out. It was horrible, but I am so glad I'm better now. Story 9. Gallstones. I curled up on my shower floor thinking I was dying during the attacks. Story 10. Appendicitis. If you feel a sharp, stabbing pain in the lower right part of your abdomen, go to the doctor or emergency room immediately. Story 11. Watching my family slowly wither into hollow shells of themselves due to addiction, I had to bury my little sister while my mom was in jail, watching her funeral via video call. Story 12. Knowing the difficult life my father led included multiple injuries, loss of teeth, a smashed eye socket that caused his eye to cave in, being beaten in a road rage incident that resulted in epilepsy, and being assaulted by the police for stopping to help a shot man who was at risk of shock from blood loss, along with extreme alcoholism and a lobotomy. Towards the end of his life, he was homeless and ultimately was hit by a car. His body was briefly lost in transit, and when it finally arrived at the mortuary, I received a call informing me, as his son, that I should ask someone else to identify his body. The mortician stated he had never seen a body in such a condition. The fall from grace was significant. My father was a doctor of pharmacology, a member of Mensa, and played an instrumental role in forming a pharmacists' union. He also experienced childhood seizures that he outgrew, only to have them return later in life, along with teenage alcoholism. That my father, who was a voracious reader and loved learning, accomplished so much despite these obstacles astounds me. Story 13. Emotionally painful. Not receiving a response when I knocked on my nan's front door. Then looking through the letterbox and seeing, nope, still not there yet, and it was 32 years ago. Story 14. Overhydration. I drank about 8 liters in 5 hours. My body had so much fluid that it completely filtered out my salts, and water was pushing my brain against my skull. The first symptoms were similar to looking into the sun and seeing black spots in my vision. Then I became confused. Obviously, I was urinating a lot, and it was clear like water. My liver or kidneys or whatever were filtering everything out. I figured my best option was to eat something, so I had a bowl of cereal. At this point, I didn't feel much better and went back to the bathroom. On the way, I projectile vomited all over the wall. It was lime green, and I felt like a character from the beginning of a movie. It felt like my eyes were being pushed out of my skull, and it was the worst pain I had ever experienced. By then, I went into psychosis and lost consciousness. I woke up in the hospital at least 4 hours later, with nurses and family around me, asking what I had taken. While I was out, I apparently flailed my body around like a madman and screamed nonsense. Luckily, I filtered my system so well that I passed a urine test for my drug charges in the days that followed. Summary: a 16-year-old individual consumed too much water in an attempt to pass a drug test. They became overhydrated, were hospitalized, and ultimately passed the test. Story 15. Physically, I had ocular shingles in my eye that were affecting my brain, or I experienced sepsis shortly after. It's hard to say which was more difficult. Emotionally, when my son died in my arms, it was devastating. I really can't compare the two, so I won't. Story 16. I often find myself loving those who do not love me back. Unrequited love has been a constant theme in my life. I have had difficulty forming friendships with women because they tend to become jealous and betray me. My father passed away when I was 14, and my mother never really expressed maternal love towards me. Overall, I have experienced a profound lack of love throughout my life. Story 17. Healing from a C-section makes sneezing, coughing, and laughing feel like your insides are going to rip out. However, my doctor would only prescribe over-the-counter medication. Perhaps other women have had different experiences. Story 18. Putting my childhood dog down was a difficult decision. He was a Cocker Spaniel that I chose from the litter in 5th grade when I was 11 years old. At 26, my family and I made the heartbreaking choice to let him go. He could hardly move without assistance, and it wasn't fair for him to continue living with such poor quality of life, especially when we could see he was in so much pain. I was in the room with the veterinarian when they administered the medication and sat on the floor beside him so he wouldn't die surrounded by strangers. Neither of my parents could bring themselves to be there. He walked around for a bit, then lay down next to my legs, and I felt him go limp against my thigh. I was an emotional wreck the entire time, a grown man who had spent his entire adolescence with this dog, sobbing alongside the technicians in the room. I'm tearing up just writing this. I'm in my 30s now and am fortunate to have another wonderful dog, but it still hurts to think about losing him. They truly are family. Story 19. Having to give up on a relationship that I have been in for over 10 years is the hardest thing I have ever done. Walking away and trying to figure out what comes next is challenging. I am leaving the past behind and trying to determine who to think about and what actions to take. It is very difficult and painful to accept this defeat. Story 20. Physical pain from shingles was unbearable. I have experienced natural childbirth, but shingles was worse. Emotional pain came from watching my dad take his last breath. He had been sedated on a ventilator for about a month, so there was no last conversation, just my mom, my sisters, and me holding his hands. Story 21. Probably my grandfather's death is the most painful experience, but a close second is when I accidentally ran over and killed a cat. I adore cats and I was traumatized. I donated to a few cat charities to ease my conscience, and I avoid that road now. Story 22. When my grandmother walked in on her walker to my mother's palliative care room and my mother cried so plaintively, it was heart-wrenching. To see a 95-year-old mother watch her 61-year-old daughter dying was heartbreaking. My mother became a child again, and her mother couldn't save her. When my mother died a few hours later, I had never cried so deeply. It felt like my lungs were in my lap. Story 23. Pancreatitis and a colectomy, rectocele repair, and significant anal prolapse repair were all performed in one surgery. Childbirth was a breeze compared to both of those. Story 24. There's a saying in my language. The dead have ceased breathing, while the living gasp for breath. Over 1,000 people died due to the earthquake in my country, and thousands lost their homes. Meanwhile, the civil war continues, and the economy is falling. There is nobody to rescue the victims, nobody to bury the dead, and no one to stop the war. I cannot see anything more painful than this. Story 25. Physical pain. Is it a weird question to ask if migraines are considered physical? I used to experience them somewhat frequently to the point where I would be hugging the toilet. Emotionally, I struggled when I lost my mother and my dream job within a month of each other, just months before I was set to graduate from university. It took me years to overcome that loss, and I felt numb when I lost my best friend a couple of months after my father a few years later. Thanks to a combination of therapy and actively trying to step outside of my comfort zone this past year, I have been able to move forward. Story 26. I had a surgery recovery that went poorly and ended up with a hematoma that had to be drained without local anesthetic. Immediately after that, they redid the stitches, thankfully with local anesthesia this time, but it was too late for that. The pain of someone applying immense pressure to a fresh, deep wound bound by stitches is unimaginable. I had to bite into my shirt to avoid screaming. The total recovery from the surgery took 11 months, which was not enjoyable at all. Story 27. I had a corneal ulcer when I was 16. There are many nerve endings in your eye. Opioids were barely numbing the pain. Take care of your eyes. Story 28. Physically, the speculum is unpleasant. Emotionally, it feels like breaking up with the person you truly believed you were going to marry. Story 29. Finding out I was transgender when I was a kid. I blurted out to my husband one night after drinking, "I'm a 54-year-old female." Story 30. Getting a straight catheter while on the verge of having my bladder rupture after aortic surgery, while freshly in the hospital following a motorcycle crash. Story 31. I fractured my humerus and radius, required surgery, and now I have rods and screws holding my left arm together. It looks kind of interesting on a metal detector, but it was quite painful. The initial break was severe, but the pain after surgery, the discomfort from physical therapy, the removal of the stitches, and the long healing process made everything so much worse. This occurred in November 2024. I still have some scabbing at the surgical site, and my scar is quite noticeable. Story 32. Losing my dogs was devastating. Making the decision to put them to sleep was the most painful thing I have ever had to do. I still struggle to talk about it as it feels overwhelming. Since I lost them, all I want is to be with them. I still have their last meal in my fridge, stored in bags with their bowls. Story 33. I believe emotional hurt surpasses any physical pain I have ever experienced. The worst physical pain is likely childbirth. Story 34. Physically, I dropped a 45-pound plate on my toes. Emotionally, I learned that my cousin committed suicide at 22 years old. Story 35. Besides getting stomped on the groin while I was lying down, I would say having my knee cut open was one of the worst experiences. I was on a beach once where the ground was rocky. I walked into the water, slipped, and fell on my knee, hitting a sharp rock. Cut my knee open and I bled a lot. Story 36. Pilonidal cyst. I know it does not seem like much, but the placement makes it difficult to walk and sleep. Story 37. Physically, I had all 4 wisdom teeth removed at once. Emotionally, I witnessed someone put a knife to their throat while expressing their intent to end their life. For about 30 seconds, I was uncertain about what would happen next. Fortunately, no one was harmed. Story 38. Emotionally, it would be losing my twin grandbabies, as they were born at 23 weeks and did not survive. Physically, it would be an infected wisdom tooth. I would rather go through childbirth again than experience that pain. Story 39. Physically, the ligaments behind my knee were torn. Emotionally, I am coping with the death of my mother from cancer and having to put my cat to sleep. Story 40. Physically, I feel like my hand is being blown apart. Mentally and emotionally, I am struggling with the loss of my baby sister or possibly discovering infidelity. Story 41. Swapping between antidepressants can be challenging. You need to quickly reduce the dose of your current medication and go several days without any before you can start the new one gradually. This process took a toll on me mentally. I felt like a shell of a person for a while, and it took many months to recover. Story 42. The loss of a parent and 4 true friends in 5 years. Half the people I loved were gone in what seemed like the blink of an eye. Story 43. I was involved in a serious accident on the highway during the rain, and my car was totaled. My ear was severely injured and required 27 stitches to reconstruct. Story 44. Emotionally, I was bullied and shunned throughout high school after being wrongfully labeled a snitch in 9th grade. Physically, I was in so much pain after my ACL reconstruction surgery that I started twitching and shaking, which made the pain even worse. Story 45. Being born and discovering that my mother had the option to terminate her pregnancy, but chose not to because she is pro-life deeply affects me. It hurts even more now that, as an adult, she supports pro-choice views and uses me as an example of why private Catholic schools shouldn't teach abstinence. She could have had a completely different life if she had known about safe sex. Additionally, my father chose drugs and other women and their children over me, as I remind him of his past while he is now sober. He has also started a new family in his 30s. Story 46. Chronic neuropathic pain started after a COVID-19 infection that required hospitalization. I was 30 and healthy at the time. Sometimes it feels like someone is trying to drill a hole through my brain while stabbing me with multiple knives and needles. Story 47. I had a severe abscess in my armpit that I tried to ignore for too long. It became so painful one night that I had to drive myself to the emergency room, where they lanced it. The most painful part was getting the lidocaine injection directly into the abscess in my armpit. It was the worst pain I have ever experienced. Story 48. Shattering my fractured ankle by stepping down on it after a car accident. The period between the numbing medication wearing off and the pain relief medication taking effect after having my impacted wisdom teeth removed without general anesthesia. Throwing out my lower back from sleeping in an uncomfortable position on a stiff mattress. Story 49. Death of my dad. Enduring challenging cancer treatment. Feeling my life diminish while trying to appear capable. Story 50. Having these terrible rumors was probably the most painful experience of my life. The violation of my privacy and body, along with being ruthlessly kicked down and sabotaged as if my boundaries, needs, and wants did not matter, are the 3 worst things that have happened to me. Story 51. I thought circumcision was the most painful moment of my life until I got laser hair removal for the hair in that area. Story 52. Grief from my ex's suicide or falling off a roof face first into a brick barbecue pit, losing half my teeth, breaking my nose with a chunk of my lip missing, and chipping my elbow and knee, left me bruised all over. I was refused pain medication for days because I had a mild traumatic brain injury, and they can interact poorly with that. I experienced Broca's aphasia for about 14 hours and couldn't speak normal words. It was wild. The funny thing is, I look like it never happened now. My lip grew back like a lizard's tail. By the way, don't worry about me. I'm doing great, minus the authoritarianism. Story 53. I fractured my clavicle near the sternum and shoulder, splitting it in the center while mountain biking. It was the first time I had been biking in 5 years, and I thought I could still do it. Unfortunately, I could not. Story 54. Menstrual cramps can be uncomfortable. I had a kidney stone, and it wasn't as painful as some of the cramps I experienced. Now, I take birth control, so I no longer have my period. This change has significantly improved my life. Story 55. I carried something heavy on one shoulder and must have torn something in my neck area because the next morning I could barely move. I had to hold my forehead to relieve the weight of my head in order to sit up straight. Story 56. Diabetic ketoacidosis. My blood was poisoning me from the inside out. It felt like I had been run over by a truck, as if I had bruises everywhere. I could barely move. I still do not know how I managed to get through it. Story 57. I had to get stitches in my fingertips. That almost made me pass out. It hurt so much. Have I had a sheltered life? Story 58. I had a large hollow bone cyst as a child. The walls of my humerus were as thin as a potato chip, in the words of my doctor. The first time I broke it, I was 8 years old. I was still able to move it and bend my elbow since the break was nearly by my armpit and shoulder. The emergency room nurse didn't believe it was broken since I wasn't crying from pain. When I told her I wasn't fully able to extend my arm for the x-ray, she pulled my arm, causing a bone shard to rip my tricep. You could hear the ripping sound. I was definitely crying after that. She went pale and ran off to take the x-ray, which showed the large shard of bone sticking into my arm. I have broken it 5 more times since then. My shoulder slings and I became good friends. Good times. Story 59. My only sibling, my younger sister, died of breast cancer at 39 years old. She had just had her second child, who was a baby when she was going through all of this. Sadly, she only lived 2 years after her diagnosis. She left behind a husband and 2 daughters, ages 5 and 2, along with me and our parents. It is the hardest thing I have ever dealt with. I had a baby of my own at the time, and it was difficult not to spend every waking minute with my sister. Minutes become much more precious once we know those moments will run out sooner rather than later. Story 60. I had a large skin cancer removed from my ear. They removed a significant chunk and then reconstructed the area so it still looks like an ear. It was the most painful and miserable recovery of my life. I am elderly and have had 2 major abdominal surgeries for a different cancer, but this was the worst. The ear has many pain receptors. Story 61. Finding out that my dad was stealing from the college fund my grandparents set up to support his failing company was shocking. He didn't even give me a choice. Story 62. I had to break up with a woman I loved. I experienced the death of my grandfather and dealt with sciatic nerve damage. All 3 situations are very different. I'm also realizing I had a good life. My heart goes out to you all. Story 63. Watching the Toronto Maple Leafs lose a 3-0 lead to the Boston Bruins in the final 5 minutes of Game 7 in the first round of the playoffs. Story 64. I broke my arm and had a full cast on. After 6 weeks of having my elbow bent, when the cast was removed, I couldn't straighten my arm. Someone I knew thought I was being overly dramatic about it. Their comments made the pain of the broken bone seem insignificant. Story 65. Kidney stones and contractions from my body were signs of early labor at 23 weeks. They administered morphine for the pain. Story 66. Facial nerve pain and dental problems for almost a year and a half, with no doctor or dentist providing any answers. Every day is a struggle. Story 67. I burst a testicle when I was in my late teens. I jumped off a roof while being chased and landed on a fence, literally left sitting on it. I gritted my teeth through the pain, not realizing what I had done. That evening, I cycled 4 miles to see my girlfriend, passed out from the pain, and ended up in the accident and emergency department. Story 68. Mental acceptance that my mother would rather be right than have a relationship with her daughter. Physically, my kneecap dislocates occasionally because I have deformed knees. Story 69. Endometriosis took a year to get a diagnosis. I was pain-free for a few months, but it started coming back. I don't go to the doctor for it anymore. I just live with it now. No doctors, not even a specialist, can help me. There is no treatment that doesn't leave me feeling sick. Story 70. I had blood in my maxillary sinuses days after surgery. When the doctor found out, he called the surgeon, who decided to remove it immediately after applying some topical anesthetic. I lost consciousness from the pain. Story 71. Getting a shard of broken glass embedded in my foot while getting in the shower was painful. Crying on the bathroom floor made it worse. Story 72. My father wasted away and slowly starved to death from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease 2 years ago. There is no way I will accept that. Everyone deserves death with dignity. We would do it for an animal, but not for ourselves. It infuriates me. Story 73. I met someone special and entered a remarkably beautiful relationship filled with love, respect, fun, joy, adoration, and intimacy. We managed to get through some difficult moments with open communication and understanding. We handled the long distance with ease as well. Almost 3 years in, I experienced a mental breakdown and did not express my feelings at all. I completely shut down, and she did not know or understand what was happening. It devastated her, and she ended the relationship. I tried to explain when I was in a better mental state, but it was too late. The most painful aspect of it is knowing that I not only ruined the relationship but also affected her life, plans, and dreams. That feeling is truly heartbreaking. Story 74. My sinus fluids once moved up to my ears while I was sleeping, eventually damaging my right eardrum. I was hitting walls and biting anything on the way to the hospital to relieve the pain. Story 75. When I was giving birth, I had to be injected with something called magnesium sulfate because I had preeclampsia. That was the most painful experience I have ever had. The birth was nothing compared to that pain. I literally felt like I was being burned with sugar water from the inside out. Story 76. I am being accused of cheating in my 7.5 years of marriage, which includes 7.5 years of dating, because I went out with my coworkers at night once or twice a year. Although infidelity has never occurred on my part during these 15 years, I am facing divorce based on this unfounded accusation. Story 77. I am contemplating suicide and feeling close to ending my life due to family conflict and not being taken seriously as an adult. Story 78. Emotionally, I lost my dad unexpectedly a year ago. Physically, I injured my shoulder while wrestling in high school. Story 79. I lost my best friend, someone I have known since birth. We went to school together, lived together during university, got married around the same time, and had children at similar stages in our lives. We literally shared my life experiences. Then, at age 47, out of nowhere, he was taken from his home and sentenced to 12 years in prison for crimes against children. It would have been easier to understand if he had been convicted of murder. How do you process the realization that your hero is a child rapist? Story 80. I crushed my left foot in a workplace accident. Yes, I was wearing steel-toed boots, but it hurt a lot. I only broke my big toe, and my foot was very purple and squished looking. That was 6 years ago, and it has never felt the same since. It always tingles. Story 81. After trying for 10 months, my first pregnancy ended in a miscarriage. Then I had another one 4 months later, just as I was beginning to heal. The trauma of it all, coupled with the simultaneous feelings of relief and disappointment each month I do not get pregnant, has been overwhelming. I also fear becoming pregnant again and possibly losing it once more. It has been an incredibly difficult experience. Story 82. Physical pain, gallstones. I actually threw up. The pain was so bad. Emotional pain. One of my closest friends passed away a few weeks ago. I am still not over it. Story 83. I feel like my life has been a very slow roller coaster. I am terrified of heights, so even though I have felt secure at times, it has also felt like a nightmare. Recently, I lost my mother, my best friend, and I had a falling out, and my significant other is too far and too busy to comfort me. Being with her is a dream for me, and my best friend, who was like a brother to me, does not believe in that at all. It is painful to see someone so important to me slowly stop paying attention and blame me for not confiding in them. For the past 6 months, I have been going back and forth. I have been avoiding this pain in my heart, but even now, the distraction is not helping. Story 84. Gout attack is absolutely excruciating. I am currently recovering from 2 broken knees, and it's 5 times worse. Story 85. Thunderclap and cluster headaches, also known as the suicide headache, cause an indescribable level of pain. I feel anxious just thinking about it. Story 86. When I was 18, I became very ill and coughed so hard that I collapsed my left lung. I wasn't sure what was happening, but it felt like I had been shot in the chest. It was the most painful experience I have felt so far, and I am now 43 years old. I consider myself very lucky. Story 87. I experienced constipation and struggled to pass hard stool, resulting in a painful anal fissure that took weeks to heal. Trying to use the restroom felt extremely uncomfortable. Story 88. I had a blood clot in my abdomen, followed closely by dry sockets after my wisdom teeth removal. In my experience, childbirth was not nearly as painful as those 2 events. Story 89. I experienced pain between my ear canal and jaw, had hallucinations for days, and did not sleep. It was the worst week of my life, to be honest. Story 90. I suffered a back injury that caused my spine to curve into an S shape, resulting in scoliosis. Mentally, I was heavily impacted when my cat, whom I had since I was 4, died in a tragic way. My cat was bitten by a pit bull, which caused severe damage to her small intestines and ripped her spleen, leading to a painful situation. I was unable to be there as I had moved over 1,000 miles away. Story 91. Seeing my dad pass away and 10 years later watching my brother pass away from the same disorder was incredibly painful. Childbirth is the worst physical pain I have ever felt. Story 92. Passing a gallstone. As a man, I felt validated because my sister-in-law had one too and said it was much more painful than giving birth. Story 93. All very close to equal. Gout. Waking up from neck surgery with Narcan twice. My wife passed away, leaving me with a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 7-year-old. Story 94. Hearing my dad's voice when he called to tell me my aunt had unexpectedly passed away was heart-wrenching. I never want to hear such pain from another person again. Story 95. When my best friend died suddenly in August, I experienced overwhelming grief. I had an ectopic pregnancy that ruptured. My oldest child left in the middle of the night but returned a couple of hours later. I watched my dad sob after his sister passed away just a couple of weeks after their mother had died. I had to put my beloved dog down because his brain was no longer functioning properly. My elderly dog also had to be put down because we could not afford $5,000 for just diagnostics and the hospital stay. I couldn't hold her while she passed because the young children were running around, expressing emotions they didn't know how to handle. Story 96. Physically, my appendix felt like it was nearly bursting. Emotionally, I was so broke that I didn't know where my next meal was coming from. Story 97. I broke both my tibia and fibula in both legs at the same time. It happened slowly, and I could see and hear my bones break. It was a farming accident when I was 13. Story 98. Pain-wise, I can mention 3. 1. Wrist fracture as long as you don't move. 2. Hemorrhoids and mockery from parents. This one lasted for years. 3. Headaches due to parental emotional oppression. Story 99. Emotionally, when my 29-year-old brother was told by the doctor that there was nothing more they could do to help him and that he had to go home to die, the worst part was watching him snuggle into our mom and say, "I don't want to die." He contracted COVID-19 and never fully recovered. It turns out he developed heart failure, among other complications. He passed away 6 months after contracting COVID-19 and just 1 week after returning home from the hospital. Physically, he experienced natural childbirth. Story 100. Getting rejected from your dream program 3 times, graduating with a master's degree and spending the next 14 months facing rejection from every job despite being qualified, trying to make friends and finding none, and trying to date without success. I went from wanting to help the world become a better place with my skills to feeling unwanted and unloved, begging for relief from my pain. Story 101. Either a cracked tooth that needed a root canal or a scratched cornea from leaving contacts in too long. It was extreme pain for both. Take care of your bodies, people. We only get one. I need to take my own advice. Story 102. For me, it was meeting the first girl I cared about who already had a boyfriend. Then I made a mistake and lost the spark. Story 103. My father passed away 11 days ago. It has been difficult. Intrusive thoughts randomly pop up every hour, every day. Feeling every emotion at any moment is challenging. Story 104. The death of my sister was completely unexpected and devastating. She was 47 years old. Survivor's guilt is a real experience. Story 105. Mental pain from losing loved ones affects many of you. Regarding physical pain, nothing compares to the 3 weeks after surgery, especially days 3 to 8 after a full knee replacement. Story 106. I grew up with no one who cared about me for the first 18 years of my life. The first time I had friends was in college, and I became overly attached to them. They eventually confronted me and told me they didn't actually like me. Story 107. My mom passed away 6 months ago. I feel like my heart has been ripped out. Now, I am going through a divorce after leaving my abusive husband. Story 108. Losing someone close to me is difficult, whether it is through passing away or simply not having them in my life anymore. It brings both physical and mental pain. Story 109. Having a speculum opening my body as a virgin, being packed with an entire roll of gauze after a hysterectomy, experiencing a clean break of my right tibia and dealing with an undetermined intestinal issue that causes me to sweat dramatically and experience extreme cramping, all in an effort to remove whatever my intestinal system decides to forcefully evacuate. I do not know if it is related to irritable bowel syndrome or something different entirely, but I do know that I absolutely dread it and hate when it happens. I have no idea what causes it because it is inconsistent, and food products do not help in determining the cause. It is very frustrating. Story 110. I had surgery for a fractured calcaneus a week ago. Reading all these comments made me realize this is nothing really. Story 111. I should have just been a stripper, never committed. Committed or not, they will still want to hang out with a dancer. No hate to dancers. You are all beautiful. And I wish I could be as beautiful and confident as you. Someone I was heavily committed to would leave me alone while he was out with dancers and told me I was forbidden to talk to the opposite sex, even at work. Story 112. I once received a general anesthetic that made me feel legitimately insane for several hours. I experienced intense dread, paranoia, depression, anxiety, an inability to sleep despite a deep craving to do so, and rage. I honestly have to congratulate myself for not harming the people around me in the hospital. Also, since I was new to the area, I had to drive myself home and, by some miracle, didn't crash. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.